Welcome everyone to this Let's Play of Kerbal Space Program 1.0.5, and it's been a while since we saw this mining vessel. This is the mining prospector vessel that we built in the previous episode to satisfy a contract. We've got a contract up here which is to acquire 1,150 units of fresh ore from Minmus. And to bring that 1,150 units of ore back into the orbit of Kerbin. We can see Kerbin and the Mun back there in the background. Now, Tamthy Kerman is our pilot. She's brought us to the sphere of influence of Minmus, which we can see approaching here on the left. Now, we only have some very small tanks. They're only going to hold 75 ore each. That's only 150 ore. Now, that's because this is going to be a prospecting craft, just to find a decent place for us to do our bulk mining. What we'll do is we'll use this as the mining rig, and we will bring down some larger tanks to hold our fresh ore, and then we will send it back to Minmus when we have our 1,150 units to complete that mission. But first things first, we need to rendezvous with Minmus Station 1, so we will catch up with Tamthy when she is on approach. Well, as you can see, Tamthy, being the one-star pilot that she is doing a grand job of getting us in towards Minmus Station 1. We are 2 kilometers away and moving at a target relative speed of just 13.6 meters per second. So good job, Tamthy. So let's just complete this maneuver. We'll use a little bit of time warp to bring us in, keeping our target speed relatively low, but using time to our advantage. So there we go, 1.5 kilometers. You can just about make out the craft now. You can just about see the base part. You can also see we've got quite a lot of debris in the background. We are going to have to sort that out at some point, but not today. Today, Tamthy is going to be bringing us into a nice, steady docking procedure. So let's just bring time warp down again and just bring our speed down as well. Now I've got the throttle, the maximum throttle set down quite low, so we are going to bring the throttle up quite high in order to kill our relative speed. So there we go, we're going at 3 meters per second. That's plenty. We've going to drift in quite nicely. Now we've got the large light up docking ports here at the base, but we're going to dock with the standard Clampotron docking port there at the top. So we've got about 200 meters still to go. You can see the habitation ring there now, and you can also make out the various modules, the greenhouse module that we have on our station there, which is providing us with ample supplies for our stay here at Minmus. So we've got 170 meters to go. When we get into about 40 or 50, we'll go into a sort of docking orientation. So let's just move ourselves just around, ready to kill off our final speed. Now I'm quite happy for this not to be exactly on point, because I don't want to be crashing into anything. So at the moment it looks like we're going to be heading slightly to the left of our station and slightly above it, which is ideal. Because we want to dock at this top port up here. So we've got 100 meters still to go. And we're going to have a nice healthy distance between the two stations. So we're going to have quite a gap to cross when we go into our docking mode. But we'll let it drift in. Let it drift in to sort of 40 or 50 meters. That's a nice safe distance. And then we'll kill our velocity and we will just cross over to the Minmus station and just check out how Minmus station is doing for electricity supplies and orientation. We'd like it to be as vertical as possible. So let's just kill off our final 2 meters per second of relative speed. There we go, down to 0.7, and let's kill that off. So we're just drifting in a little bit towards, so I think what we're going to do is rotate ourselves around and just boost ourselves just a little bit above the station. There we go, just a little bit smoky there in space, but let's just bring ourselves up. There we go, 0.7, give us a little bit of vertical velocity, and then we'll bring ourselves into a halt. So we're going to dock with this docking port up here, so let's set that as a target. There we go, and set this docking point here as where we are going to control from. Let's bring up our docking alignment indicator, which you can see here down in the bottom right, and let's just orientate ourselves ready to make our approach. There we go, bring ourselves around. There's the big orange reticule, bring that into the center. Let's get RCS on. There we go, centered up. And then I think we just need to arrest our velocity. There we go, just slowing it down. There we go. Docking is clearly not one of Tamthy's primary skills. So we need to rotate the capsule. We don't actually need to rotate the capsule, but let's rotate the capsule anyway to give us a nice orientation towards the docking port. And we're just moving a little bit away, so let's kill off our vertical velocity away. Now we're just creeping towards the docking port now, keeping this yellow reticle just in this sort of square between the crosshairs, between the green and the white crosshairs. Just allows us to keep in proportion our acceleration towards our target. So we just want to drift in now, so we should be, there we go, we're clearly above the docking port now, we're in alignment with the axis, and you can see that again here with the green axes over the white center line. So we're just drifting in towards now, so we're only going a tiny fraction forward, so let's just accelerate forward with the H key, and we can see our distance is just under 10 meters per second. Nice gentle approach. Let's just correct the orange reticle, let's just bring that back. There we go. Now magnetic forces will take over and correct for slight problems, but I think we're doing just fine. So 0.1 meter a second, so let's just thrust forward. And just keep ourselves as aligned as possible. Drifting off to one side, so let's just bring it back. There we go, the green crosshair is beginning to come back into the center. 2 meters away from docking, 1.8. So we can see we're getting very close now. Just beginning to drift off to one side. Magnetic field takes effect, and we're docked. So Tamthy has docked with her buddy Bill and Valentina, so we now have 3 Kerbals aboard this station, this very spacious station for 3 Kerbals, so we can close the docking port alignment indicator now, and I think it's about time that we switched over to our scanning satellite and decided where we're going to land our prospector. So I'll see you in a moment. Right, I've switched over to our Minmus scanner satellite. This is the one that's been doing scans for minerals on Minmus. So we'll bring up the scanning interface, and this allows us to highlight the different materials that we might want to mine. Now we're after ore, so we'll highlight ore, and that's showing up here in this sort of pinkish purple colour. And this is highlighting for us the concentrations of ore around the surface of Minmus. So you can see these sort of highland areas here have quite high concentrations. And also we can see here on the lighter side there are some concentrations through here. Now if I temporarily remove that, you can just about make out that these are the flat areas that you see on Minmus, and which makes them rather easy to land on. So if I highlight that again, you can see there's quite a high concentration here in this part of Minmus. It's on the flats, it's just coming in to daylight. You might remember that this sort of peak here was where the Grumpf bug landed and then came down here onto the flats. So this might be an ideal location for us to plant our prospector. Now to make it a little bit easier for us, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up the waypoint manager to plant a waypoint on our location. So let's add a custom waypoint, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a location on the map, and I'm going to use the height of the terrain to be our height for the waypoint. So let's set a location on the map and let's just position it. We can see we're getting around about 0, in terms of latitude and longitude. It doesn't really matter where we put it. So it might be an idea, let's say if we put it, there we go, altitude of 0. So that's actually sea level. So let's just plant it there, shall we? So that's going to be our target. We can change the icon if we wish. So we've got a laser. We could change it to a drill. Might be quite good. So let's change it to a drill. And just for kicks, what we'll do is we'll change it to pink to match the colour of the highlighted on the map, which is this sort of purpley pink sort of colour. It doesn't actually matter, but it'll work. So now let's change this to ore site. This is going to be the site that we're going to do our drilling at. So so let's save that. Oh, we didn't apply the change of icons, so let's just edit that and make sure we change the colour of the icon. It should have done. So let's apply that. There we go. There we go. Applied that. We've got the drill symbol now, and we have that sort of purpley pink colour. So let's just save that one now. So that gives us our target. That'll be available for us in the map view for our prospector. So let's switch back to Minmus Station 1 and decide the lucky fellow who's going to be landing our prospector vehicle. Now I don't actually have that many Kerbals in my space program, and we only have 3 of them here on Minmus Station 1. We have Bill, Val and Tamthy. Now Tamthy brought the prospector vehicle, you can see it up here, to the station. So she's going to be rather tired from her vigorous trip, her rather tiring trip out here to Minmus. So we've either got Val or Bill. Now I think I'm going to reserve Bill for when we bring down the main transport vehicle, so I'm going to take Val. But there is one thing I wanted to check first, and that is what experience Val already has. And you can see that she has an orbit around Kerbin and an orbit around Minmus for experience. So she doesn't have a sort of land on Minmus experience point yet, and neither does Bill. So they're both going to benefit from a trip to the surface. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take both Val and Bill down to the surface at some point, and we'll start with Val, and we'll get Val transferred into the vehicle. So I think the first thing we really want to do here is just deal with transferring crew. So let's look at who we can transfer. So we can transfer out Val or Bill, but the problem is Tamthy is occupying the sole seat in the craft up here, the prospector craft. So we'll do the transfer for Tamthy first. So let's transfer Tamthy out into another pod. Well, I think I'm going to put her into the habitation module so that she can get some rest out here in the habitation ring. So she's just been transferred into the habitation ring, so it's rather dark in there. She can get some sleep, and in the meantime we can go back here into the command module and transfer out Valentina, and we will transfer her out into the cupola module up here on the prospector vehicle. You can see the potential targets highlighted here in blue. So we'll click on the target pod up here. So she's now up here in the cupola module, ready to take the prospect vehicle down. You can see the background has changed for her. We just check on her IVA view. You can see her there looking straight out at her docking port, so that didn't really work very well, did it? But she does have a nice side view there, so she will have to make use of that during the landing procedure. So you can see she has quite a spacious capsule to be using. So let's get her back out onto her mission, her primary mission, which is to land the prospector. So let's just decouple. We'll control from the capsule and we will undock. So there we go. Let's undock. There she goes. She is now detached. So let's get the RCS on and just back away from the station, and then double check where her landing site is. Now I actually think her landing site is going to be about here, so we are going to have to make a little bit of an orbit. So let's just double check where we are. Yes, that's what I thought. We're actually more or less over the top of the landing site as it is. So what we will do is we're orbiting in this direction, so we will add a maneuver node here, and we will then, let's just bring it back around to, let's say, here, and what we can then do is just pull in, there we go, we can just pull in our orbit, and as Minmus rotates, we'll just double check where the landing site is going to be when we arrive, let's say, somewhere over here. So let's just warp to here and warp ourselves around Minmus. You can just about make out both of our vehicles here, these little icons here. So you can see that our waypoint has already moved a fair distance around. So if we do the maneuver here, it's going to have travelled a little bit further on. So let's just bring Minmus into focus, and what we will do is move that around and begin our descent around about here. We can then make adjustments. When we get nearer the location as to whether we need to land a little bit further around to take account of the orbit. So let us move warp to here and then get ready to make our maneuver. So let's get the nav ball up. Oops. Let's get our warp to here. There we go. So let's just warp forward. We've only got 25 meters per second to burn off. We've got plenty of delta V. That's an enormous amount of delta V for landing on Minmus. I still do have the engine reduced in thrust, which will make it a little bit easier for us to maneuver. Now we don't need the RCS at this point, so I'll turn that on. Turn that on when we need it, but I will turn on the SAS. So we're more or less at our maneuver node now. So let's just rotate ourselves around. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to lower our periapsis here and just see where that comes relative to our target landing site. So it looks like it's going to come in roughly here, and that should be pretty much perfect. Now we do have to come a little bit south. Doesn't really matter. Anywhere around here. It looks like our location for our site is just in this sort of bay, if you like, in this flats area. So I don't think it really matters. But it might be nice to have a little bit of shelter, if you like, from the elements here in the bay. But perhaps we'll come this side, since that's the orbit we'll go to. So we'll perhaps come just this side, perhaps into this part of the bay here. So let's just bring the thrust up a bit, burn off the rest of our delta V. And this will be about 4,000 meters, which should be fine. Should get us over the mountains on this side, and then we'll just put our pedal to the metal and land ourselves somewhere in this bay here, a little bit north of our marker. So let's just warp ourselves around to here. Let's kill the maneuver. We don't need the maneuver now. Let's just warp ourselves around to about here and just see where we're going to be. Well, it looks like, here we go, it looks like we're going to be a little bit off to this side. So let's just allow ourselves, I think, a little more leeway. Let's warp to here. Here we come. Warping at a much lower time rate because, of course, we're much lower atmosphere. We're much lower in altitude at this point, so that's why our time warp is limited. So I think we're about ready to come in for a landing. So let's turn ourselves retrograde and get ready to kill our velocity. So let's hammer the retrograde marker and just put our thrust up to maximum. Now for this part it might be an idea if we raise our maximum thrust just so we can decelerate. There we go, but now let's reduce it down because the gravity being so low here on Minmus, we don't want to end up going back up into orbit. That would not be a good thing. So let's get the gear out. Double click on the gear button, brings out the gear. Let's get surface relative velocity. Let's get back on to stability assist because we are still going to have to kill some of our speed. So and some of that is horizontal. You can see the difference between the up point on the nav ball and our current retrograde marker are different, which means we are drifting slightly sideways. So let's just push that marker, let's herd that marker just towards the center. And just get ourselves going more or less straight down. Now we still have a decent distance to go. Our terrain altitude here is 5,800 meters, so we've still got plenty of terrain altitude to go. So that's all good. We've got plenty of time. We're landing in the sun. Valentina's done a good job of landing on the light side of Minmus, so that's also Also good flying there from another 1-star pilot. Now, according to the settings up here, our suicide burn altitude is about 770 meters. I'm hoping, crossing fingers, that is based on our current level of thrust, which means we have about 3,600 meters to go, and it's going to take us about 76 delta V of our 1,000 delta V in order to get onto the surface at exactly 0 meters per second. So everything is looking pretty good. Where is the sun at present? Is it right up? It's absolutely slap bang above us. So it means our shadow is going to be just about make out our shadow right there. So we're going straight down. Perpendicular to the surface. We've picked up a little bit of speed, so let's burn off some of that speed. I like to be at a sort of about 1% of the altitude, so we really need to be at about 20 meters per second at this point. So let's just try and make that happen. So we're down to 30. And there we go, down to about 20, so I can bring the throttle down. And just keep that surface velocity just gently bearing off. Now, suicide burn is the most efficient way of getting to the surface. This is actually wasting thrust against the effects of gravity completely unnecessarily, because we're simply going to pick up the additional speed that we're in theory burning off at this point. So it isn't that efficient, but just to be careful, I do like to be well within landing parameters. So we can just see our tiny shadow just here. We've got 1,400 meters to go. Suicide burn altitude is just under 200 meters. So we've got plenty to go. We'll just get a little bit of thrust. Just keep that surface velocity from increasing too much. So that's 18 meters per second. It's just dropping very slightly, and you can see the suicide burn distance and altitude is going down because of that. So safely, very safely back down to the surface. Make sure we're not drifting off either left or right. Holding at about 18 meters per second. So suicide burn distance is about 400 meters to go, with an altitude to hit the throttle is about 100 meters. So let's just slow ourselves down. Make sure we don't drift off. Four meters per second. Anything below 10 should be fine. So 3.4, that's all perfect. So we've got a nice distinct shadow here now. We're coming down dead vertical, 2.8 meters per second. Val is concentrating intently on the controls. Again, let's just try and make sure we don't drift off either left or right. 2.5 meters per second. And we're well within our suicide burn distance. I'm not going to use the suicide burn. I just don't trust Val to complete the maneuver effectively with only 1 star. So let's just keep everything nice and gently dropping down. Because we're going so slow now, even the slightest maneuvers is taking us off that vertical. So I've just taken a little bit off the throttle. Just speeding up just very slightly, so let's just get a little bit of throttle back on. 3 meters per second, 2.9. Just drifting off very slightly. So let's just keep herding it back. 2.3, 2.2. 2 meters per second. Just drop the throttle just a little bit. Just gently bringing it down. Just see a little puff there coming out of that little poodle engine. It's actually a powerful engine for this sort of manoeuvre. So we're just dropping it down. I'm going to kill the engine just as we touch down. And there, kill the engine. Perfect. Brilliant landing there. Brilliant landing, Valentina. Slap bang in the middle of these flats. A perfectly open area for us to do our mining activity. You can just see our ore site a little off to the distance, which is just over that ridge over there. So we weren't particularly accurate at landing at our ore site, but Val did a brilliant job of bringing us into a landing. So with that said, I'd like to thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next episode when we can actually get some ore off this minty rock. I'll see you then.